What happens when you try to erase a woman from her own story? You don't just anger her, you awaken a storm. This isn't just a tale of revenge, it's a story of reclamation. We follow Kennedy Hastings, a brilliant woman pushed into the shadows by an insecure ex-husband, Richard Sterling. For his biggest night, a glamorous charity gala meant to cement his legacy, he delivered the ultimate insult, a formal ban. He wanted her gone forgotten. But he forgot one crucial detail. Kennedy was no longer the woman he once controlled. With her new partner, the enigmatic billionaire Jeremy Shaw, she wasn't just going to crash the party, she was going to own it. Stay with us as we unfold a night of high-stakes drama where the guest list is a weapon, the seating chart is a battlefield, and a single speech has the power to build an empire or burn one to the ground. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. A sliver of digital ice slid into the warm, sun-drenched calm of Kennedy Hastings's life. It was from a name she hadn't seen in her inbox in over 2 years. Cynthia Mayhew, Richard Sterling's executive assistant, a woman who had perfected the art of communicating condescension through politely worded messages. The subject line was sterile, regarding the Sterling Foundation annual gala. Kennedy's finger hovered over the trackpad. Her partner, Jeremy Shaw, was across the sprawling living room of their Manhattan penthouse. His back to her. He was on a call, his voice a low, confident murmur that always made her feel safe. The afternoon sun caught the silver in his dark hair as he paced before the floor-to-ceiling windows, gesturing occasionally towards the panoramic view of Central Park below. This life, this calm, this light, this man was the antithesis of everything she had known with Richard. She clicked. "Dear Miss Hastings, I hope this message finds you well. I'm writing on behalf of Mr. Richard Sterling in relation to the upcoming Sterling Foundation annual gala to be held on October 26th at the Grand Astoria Hotel's Celestial Ballroom. As you know, this is the Foundation's most significant event of the year, and its success is paramount. In the interest of ensuring a smooth and drama-free evening for all esteemed guests, the board and Mr. Sterling and his fiancée, Ms. Tiffany Dupont, we are formally requesting your non-attendance. Mr. Sterling feels your presence could create an unnecessary distraction from the Foundation's charitable mission. We trust you understand the sensitive nature of this request and will respect Mr. Sterling's wishes for his event to proceed without any personal complications. Sincerely, Cynthia Mayhew, Executive Assistant to Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Innovations. Kennedy read it once, then a second time. The polite corporate jargon was a thin veil over the raw personal cruelty of the message. Drama-free evening, unnecessary distraction, personal complications. He was painting her as the problem, the hysterical ex-wife who couldn't be trusted to behave in polite society. He was erasing her, not just from his present, but from his past. The Sterling Foundation, his foundation. A bitter laugh almost escaped her lips. She remembered the nights fueled by cheap coffee and takeout pizza in their tiny, pre-success apartment, where she was the one mapping out the entire concept. She had drafted the mission statement, identified the key philanthropic pillars, and even sketched the now famous intertwined S logo on a cocktail napkin. It was supposed to be their legacy, a way to give back once Sterling Innovations took off. But like everything else in the divorce and in the public narrative he'd spun since her contributions had been meticulously scrubbed from the record. He was the visionary, she was just the ex-wife. A familiar cold dread, a phantom of the life she'd escaped, crept up her spine. For 5 years of marriage, Richard Todford had been the master of quiet control. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. His power lay in dismissive sighs, in condescending explanations of things she already knew, in taking credit for her ideas in boardrooms while she was asked to fetch coffee. He had convinced her for a time that her light was merely a reflection of his sun. The divorce had been her first act of defiance. Building a new life, a life where she was valued for her mind and her spirit, had been her quiet victory. "Everything all right, darling?" Jeremy's voice cut through her reverie. He had finished his call and was now standing behind her chair, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. His touch was warm grounding. She couldn't hide the tremor in her voice. "It's from Richard's office." Jeremy's posture stiffened. He disliked Richard on principle, having heard the broad strokes of Kennedy's past, but he mostly disliked what the memory of the man did to the woman he loved. "What does that bastard want now?" Kennedy tilted her head back, looking up at his concerned face. "He's hosting his big gala, the one he built from my blueprint, and he's formally banned me from attending." She forwarded the email to his phone. He read it, his jaw tightening with each word. The silence that followed was heavy, more menacing than any shout. Jeremy was not a man of explosive anger. His fury was a cold, precise instrument. He was a self-made billionaire in the cutthroat world of private equity, a man who saw the world as a complex series of chessboards. "He's not just banning you, Kennedy," Jeremy said, his voice dangerously low. "He's publicly humiliating you. He's sending a message to the entire social and business strata of New York that you are unstable, a liability. He's trying to diminish you so he can shine brighter." Tears pricked at Kennedy's eyes, hot with shame and rage. "It's at the Grand Astoria, the Celestial Ballroom. We used to talk about getting married there one day." The memory was a fresh stab of pain. Another piece of her history Richard was now claiming as his own, with his 24-year-old fiancée, a handbag model named Tiffany. Jeremy knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. His gaze was intense. "He thinks he's in a position of power. He controls the guest list, the venue, the narrative. He believes he has built an impenetrable fortress around his ego." "It's his big night," Kennedy whispered, the fight draining out of her. "It's a fundraiser for his company, too. I heard Sterling Innovations is on shaky ground. He needs new investors. Everyone will be there. The mayor to Senator Matthews, the CEO of Omnicorp." Jeremy's eyes, which were usually a soft, thoughtful grey, now looked like polished steel. A slow, calculating smile touched his lips, a smile Kennedy had only seen once or twice when he was closing a particularly ruthless deal. "He controls the guest list," Jeremy mused, almost to himself. "But who controls the venue?" Kennedy frowned, not following his logic. "The Grand Astoria, obviously. Richard has it booked for the night." "For the night?" Jeremy repeated, his smile widening. He stood up and walked back to the window, looking down at the city as if it were a map of possibilities. "A hotel is a business. A building is an asset. An asset is something that can be bought." Kennedy's heart skipped a beat. "Jeremy, what are you thinking? You can't just buy the Grand Astoria." He turned to face her, a brilliant, audacious fire in his eyes. "No, you're right. Buying the entire hotel would take weeks and be needlessly complicated. But the holding company that owns it, Braxton Hospitality Group, I happen to know their CEO, Robert Metcalf. I also happen to know that they've been over-leveraged since their failed expansion into Asia. They need liquidity. Fast." He pulled out his phone. "And I want to see you happy. I want to see you reclaim what's yours." He wasn't just talking about the gala. He was talking about her legacy, her confidence, her story. "What are you proposing?" Kennedy asked, her voice barely a whisper, a thrill of fear and excitement coursing through her. "Richard wants to ban you from his event." Jeremy said, his thumb already scrolling through his contacts. "That's a shame. So let's make it your event. He can be your guest, if you'll have him." He paused, his eyes locking with hers. "We're not just going to crash the party, Kennedy. We're going to buy the ballroom, the chandeliers, the marble under his feet, and the very air he breathes for the evening." He found the number he was looking for. "Get dressed, darling. We have a meeting with my lawyers. It seems we're going into the hospitality business." The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a wave of intoxicating power. The tears were gone. Her spine straightened. Richard had thrown a stone, expecting her to scurry away wounded. He had no idea she was about to return with the tidal wave with Jeremy Shaw as the unstoppable tide. This was no longer about revenge. It was about rewriting the narrative with an ink made of gold. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos, a whirlwind of legal jargon, financial maneuvering, and absolute discretion orchestrated by Jeremy Shaw. Kennedy felt like she was living in a spy thriller, but the currency wasn't state secrets. It was power, pure and undiluted. Their first stop was the Midtown offices of Shaw Capital. The moment they stepped out of the private elevator into the serene, minimalist expanse of the 80th floor, a team was already assembling in the glass-walled boardroom. There was Marcus Thorne, Jeremy's lead counsel, a sharp, silver-haired man who looked like he'd been born in a three-piece suit. There was Anya Sharma, his head of acquisitions, a woman in her late 30s, whose mind moved so fast, Kennedy could practically hear it humming. And a half-dozen other analysts and legal eagles, all standing respectfully as Jeremy entered. "Good afternoon," Jeremy began without preamble. "We have a time-sensitive and highly confidential acquisition target, the Grand Astoria Hotel." Anya Sharma raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, but didn't flinch. "The whole asset, Jeremy, or a controlling stake in the parent?" "Controlling stake in Braxton Hospitality Group," Jeremy clarified. "I want operational control by Friday. That gives us 72 hours. I know they're distressed. Find their pain point, Marcus, and apply pressure. Offer them a lifeline they can't refuse. Above market value, all cash close in 48 hours. The condition is non-negotiable and immediate complete transfer of all operational oversight and assets upon signing." Marcus nodded, already making notes. "Discretion will be key. We'll run the purchase through a shell corporation. Something untraceable back to you or Ms. Hastings. Call it EV Holdings," Kennedy said, speaking for the first time. The men and women in the room turned to her. Jeremy smiled, a look of immense pride on his face. EV for Kennedy Hastings. It was a small act of ownership, but it felt monumental. Marcus Thorne gave a slight appreciative nod. "EV Holdings it is, Ms. Hastings. We'll file the incorporation papers in Delaware within the hour." For the next 2 days, Kennedy's penthouse became the war room. While Jeremy's team engaged in a high-stakes corporate raid conducted through encrypted emails and hushed phone calls, Kennedy and Jeremy planned their next move. It wasn't enough to own the venue. They had to wield that power with surgical precision. "We can't just cancel his gala," Kennedy argued, pacing the marble floor. "That's a brute force move. It's loud, but it's not smart. It makes us look like bullies. The point isn't to stop his party. The point is to show him he's a guest in my world, not the other way around." "I agree," Jeremy said, watching her. He loved seeing her like this, animated, strategic, brilliant. "He wants to control the narrative, so we'll let him think. He still does right up until the last possible second." The call came on Thursday evening. Jeremy answered, put it on speaker. It was Marcus Thorne. "Jeremy Kennedy." His voice was crisp. "The deal is done. Robert Metcalf has signed. Braxton Hospitality is ours. The wire transfer is complete. As of 5 minutes ago, EV Holdings is the legal owner and operator of the Grand Astoria Hotel and all its properties. Congratulations." Kennedy let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. It was real. She looked at Jeremy, a dizzying sense of vertigo washing over her. She, Kennedy Hastings, the woman who had once needed her husband's permission to buy a designer dress, was now the effective landlady of one of New York's most iconic luxury hotels. "Phase 1 complete," Jeremy said calmly, though his eyes danced with excitement. "Now for Phase 2. Kennedy, it's your move." And meanwhile, at the offices of Sterling Innovations, Richard Sterling was in a state of high anxiety. Ticket sales for the gala were solid, but the private high-net-worth donor pledges were soft. Rumors were swirling on Wall Street about a potential cash flow problem in his company. The gala wasn't just a charity event. It was a carefully staged performance to project strength and confidence to the very investors he needed to woo. His fiancée Tiffany was more concerned with her dress fitting and which filter to use on her Instagram posts about the hashtag Sterling Gala. "Everything is set right," he barked at Cynthia Mayhew. "The lighting, the orchestra, the seating chart. I want Senator Matthews at my right hand and the CEO of Omnicorp at my left. No mistakes." "Everything is confirmed, Mr. Sterling," Cynthia said, her voice placid. That's when the call came through on his private line. He snatched it up. "Sterling. Mr. Sterling, this is Jean-Pierre Dubois, the general manager of the Grand Astoria." The man's voice was strained thick with a French accent that seemed to heighten his distress. "Dubois, I trust my final payment went through. I expect perfection on Saturday night," Richard snapped. "Oui, Monsieur Sterling, about that. There has been a development, a change in circumstances." "What change?" "Don't tell me the florists are late. For the money I'm paying, I expect precision," Richard said, irritation rising. "No, monsieur. It is more fundamental. The hotel, it has been sold." Richard froze. "Sold? What are you talking about? You have a contract with me for the Celestial Ballroom on October the 20th. That contract is legally binding. We and the new ownership has every intention of honoring that contract," Dubois said, sounding like a man walking a tightrope. "The event will proceed as planned. However, the new ownership has taken a personal interest in your gala." A knot of ice formed in Richard's stomach. New ownership, who bought the Astoria? There was a hesitant pause on the other end of the line. "A holding company, monsieur, a firm by the name of EV Holdings." Richard didn't recognize the name. It meant nothing to him. "And what does this have to do with me?" "They have requested a copy of the event plans, the guest list, the menu, the seating chart, everything. And they have informed me they will be making some minor adjustments." "Adjustments?" Richard's voice was rising to a shout. "You tell this EV Holdings that they will do no such thing. My event is planned to the last detail. They will not touch a single place card." "Who the hell are these people?" I was instructed to have you correspond with the principal directly for any further discussion, monsieur," Dubois said clearly, wanting nothing more than to end the call. "I was told she would be in touch with you shortly." "She but?" Before Richard could demand more, the line went dead. He slammed the phone down, his mind racing. Who was this woman? Some corporate raider on a power trip. He felt a profound sense of violation. His perfectly curated evening was being interfered with by a stranger. Then his personal cell phone buzzed. A new email. The sender's address was simple, elegant Eleanor. Vance, of Vance Consulting. Come. His blood ran cold. He opened it, his hand trembling. Subject: Your upcoming event at my venue. Richard, I hear there's been some confusion regarding the Sterling Foundation Gala on Saturday. Let me clear it up. As of this afternoon, I am the owner of the Grand Astoria. Don't worry, your event will proceed as scheduled. I believe in honoring contracts. After all, a person's word should mean something. I'll be there, of course. I've taken the liberty of making a few small adjustments to the evening's program to ensure it runs smoothly and without any unnecessary distractions. Looking forward to seeing you. Warmly, Kennedy Hastings Principal. EV Holdings. Richard Sterling stared at the screen, the words blurring. EV Holdings. Kennedy. Hastings. It couldn't be. It was impossible. He thought of Jeremy Shaw, the shadowy billionaire she was seen with. He thought of the email his assistant had sent, the one filled with condescending pity. "We trust you understand." He had tried to ban her from the party, and she had responded by buying the entire goddamn hotel. The fortress he had so carefully constructed around his ego didn't just have a crack in it. Kennedy had just taken a wrecking ball to the main gate, and the terrifying part was she was now inside, and he had no idea what she planned to do next. The night of the gala arrived, draped in the crisp electric air of a New York City autumn. Limousines and black cars lined the street outside the Grand Astoria, their headlights cutting through the dusk like diamonds. The entrance to the hotel was a tableau of opulent power women in haute couture gowns, shimmering under the chandeliers, men in bespoke tuxedos, exuding an air of casual authority, and the incessant blinding flash of paparazzi cameras. Inside, Richard Sterling was a man performing a desperate pantomime of control. He stood at the entrance to the celestial ballroom, a fixed, brittle smile plastered on his face. Beside him, Tiffany Dupont, stunning in a crimson Vera Wang gown preened for the cameras, oblivious to the storm brewing in her fiancé's soul. To the outside world, they were the evening's power couple, the gracious hosts of the city's most anticipated charity event. But Richard felt like a condemned man. He had spent the last 48 hours in a futile rage, his lawyers confirming the horrifying truth: the sale was ironclad. The hotel, and by extension his event, was under Kennedy's complete control. His threats to the hotel manager had been met with polite, unyielding responses. "You will have to take that up with Ms. Hastings's representatives." He was trapped. Every time a new guest arrived, his heart leapt into his throat. Was it her? He scanned the crowd, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. He had to maintain his composure. The investors, the media, the society, doyens, they were all watching. He just had to get through this night. And then a hush fell over the grand lobby. The cacophony of chatter and camera shutters seemed to dip as if drawing a collective breath. A gleaming black Rolls-Royce Ghost had pulled up to the curb, a vehicle so silent and commanding it made the other luxury cars seem pedestrian. The chauffeur, dressed in a sharp black suit, opened the rear door. First, a leg emerged, clad in a sheer, diamond-dusted stocking, ending in a wickedly high Christian Louboutin heel. Then, Kennedy Hastings stood up, and the night truly began. She was not wearing a dress. She was wearing a statement. It was a gown of midnight blue silk, custom-made by a designer Richard didn't recognize, which was a statement in itself. It was elegant but severe cut, with an architectural precision that hugged her form before flaring out at the floor. Around her neck was a single, breathtaking piece of jewelry, the Star of the Caspian, a legendary Cartier necklace composed of sapphires and diamonds that Jeremy had gifted her. Her hair was swept up in an intricate but severe chignon, showcasing the graceful line of her neck. She looked regal, untouchable, and utterly formidable. Beside her, Jeremy Shaw emerged. He was the epitome of understated power, his Tom Ford tuxedo fitting him perfectly. He wore no jewelry, save for a Patek Philippe watch. He didn't need to. His presence alone was an accessory. He placed a hand on the small of Kennedy's back, a simple, proprietary gesture that screamed devotion and alliance. They didn't walk the press line. They didn't need to. The cameras swarmed them anyway, a frantic ballet of flashes. Jeremy guided Kennedy through the throng with an unhurried grace, parting the sea of reporters and onlookers without a word. They paused at the entrance to the ballroom, where Richard stood frozen, his smile now a ghastly rictus. Tiffany, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, looked from Kennedy to Richard, a flicker of confusion on her perfectly made-up face. "Kennedy," Richard managed to say, his voice a strangled whisper. "I wasn't expecting you." The lie was pathetic, and they all knew it. Kennedy bestowed upon him a smile that was bright, beautiful, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Richard, of course you were. I emailed you." She turned her gaze to his fiancée. "You must be Tiffany. That's a lovely dress. Red is such a bold choice." The compliment was delivered with the precision of a stiletto. Tiffany, out of her depth, simply stammered, "Thank you. Your necklace is big." Jeremy stepped forward, extending a hand to Richard, who was forced to shake it. Jeremy's grip was firm. his eyes holding Richard's for a moment too long. "Sterling," Jeremy said, his voice a low baritone. "Congratulations on your gala. It takes a lot of courage to host an event when your company's financials are under such scrutiny. Very brave." Richard snatched his hand back as if burned. The jab was a clean, vicious strike delivered in plain hearing of several nearby guests whose ears had perked up at the drama. Kennedy took Jeremy's arm. "Shall we go in, darling? I'm so eager to see the adjustments we made." She glided past Richard without another glance, leaving him standing in her wake, his face pale with fury and humiliation. The performance was over. The battle had begun. As Kennedy and Jeremy entered the celestial ballroom, the full scope of her quiet coup began to reveal itself. The room was breathtaking, a cavern of crystal chandeliers and gilded moldings, but the details were all wrong for Richard, and all right for Kennedy. The lighting, which Richard had specified to be a warm, golden glow, was now a cool, elegant silver blue, the exact shade of her gown. The floral arrangements, which were supposed to be crimson roses to match Tiffany's dress, and the foundation's branding, had been replaced with pristine white orchids, Kennedy's favorite flower. Subtly, almost imperceptibly, the grand Sterling Foundation logo projected onto the far wall seemed slightly smaller than it should be. But the masterstroke was the seating chart. A large ornate board stood near the entrance. Richard, in his original plan, had placed himself and Tiffany at the head table one, the undisputed center of power, surrounded by his most coveted potential investors. Kennedy and Jeremy found their names easily. Mr. Jeremy Shaw and Ms. Kennedy Hastings, table one. Richard and Tiffany's names were not there. A frantic search by the guests, who had noticed the power shift, revealed their placement. At the very back of the ballroom, next to the swinging doors of the kitchen entrance, was a small, isolated table for two. Table 42, Mr. Richard Sterling and Miss Tiffany Dupont. The message was not just a whisper, it was a deafening roar. The host of the party had been banished to social Siberia. The woman he had banned from the event was now sitting in his seat of honor. Laughter, quickly stifled, rippled through the crowd. Phones came out, discreetly, taking pictures of the seating board. In the world of New York high society, this was not just an insult. It was a public execution. Kennedy allowed herself a small, satisfied smile as she took her seat at the head table, Jeremy pulling out her chair for her. From her new vantage point, she had a perfect view of the entire room, a queen surveying her domain. She watched as a flustered Richard, his face a mask of thunder, was forced to lead a bewildered Tiffany on the long, humiliating walk of shame to their tiny table in the back, the eyes of every guest following their every step. The battle had been joined, and the first devastating shot had been fired by Kennedy, without her having to raise her voice at all. The atmosphere in the celestial ballroom crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with charity. It was the electric thrill of a public spectacle, the kind of high society blood sport that would be whispered about for years. Every guest was aware of the silent war being waged, and every glance was a calculated assessment of the shifting power dynamics. From their isolated outpost at table 42, Richard Sterling was vibrating with a rage so potent it was almost visible. The rhythmic swoosh of the kitchen doors beside them was a constant, maddening reminder of his humiliation. "Do something," Tiffany hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. Her earlier excitement had curdled into sour resentment. She was supposed to be the belle of the ball, the future Mrs. Sterling. Instead, she felt like a pariah seated so far from the action, she might as well have been in a different zip code. "This is your party. You're letting her ruin it." "What would you have me do?" "Tiffany," Richard snarled back, keeping his voice low. "Call security. They work for her now. She owns the building." He gestured angrily with his fork. "Look at her, holding court at my table with my investors." It was true. Kennedy and Jeremy were not gloating. They were masters of soft power. Jeremy was deep in conversation with Kenji Tanaka, the notoriously reclusive CEO of Omnicorp, while Kennedy was charming Senator Matthews, her laughter light and genuine. She wasn't talking about Richard or the drama. She was discussing policy art and philanthropy with an intelligence and grace that captivated the table. She was effortlessly demonstrating everything Richard had tried to convince the world she wasn't a woman of substance, a peer. The first course was served a chilled cucumber soup. As a waiter placed the bowl in front of Richard, he stopped him. The menu was supposed to be a 5-course surf and turf. What is this? The waiter, a seasoned professional, didn't miss a beat. The menu was updated this morning by the event controller, sir, at the request of EV Holdings. Richard looked at the new menu card on his table. It was a light, modern, plant-based tasting menu. Elegant, sophisticated, and everything he hated. He was a steak and potatoes man, a fact Kennedy knew all too well. It was another small, deliberate cut. He watched as Kennedy lifted a spoonful of her soup, her eyes catching his from across the room. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod as if to say, "Yes, I did this, and this is only the beginning." And the next phase of Kennedy's plan unfolded during the opening remarks. The program, a beautiful booklet bound in navy blue ribbon, was another of her alterations. The evening was supposed to be opened by Richard himself, a grand speech about his vision and the Foundation's work. Instead, the Master of Ceremonies, a well-known local news anchor, stepped up to the podium. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Grand Astoria for this wonderful charitable evening," he began. "Before we hear from our host, the new ownership of this magnificent hotel, EV Holdings, would like to present a short video celebrating the spirit of New York philanthropy." The massive screens on either side of the stage, which were meant to display the Sterling Foundation logo, flickered to life. Richard straightened up, expecting, or perhaps hoping for a technical glitch, a moment of failure. Instead, a beautifully produced 5-minute film began to play. It was a tribute to unsung female entrepreneurs and philanthropists throughout New York's history. It featured stories of women who had founded hospitals, built libraries, and funded arts programs, often with their contributions being overlooked or credited to their husbands. The narration was powerful, the imagery moving. The final shot was of a simple, elegant logo appearing on the screen, a stylized V intertwined with a burgeoning sapling. Underneath the text read, "The Hastings Initiative, planting the seeds for tomorrow's female leaders, coming soon." The applause was spontaneous and genuine. The film was inspiring, perfectly toned for a charity gala. But to Richard, it was a declaration of war. She was launching her own philanthropic endeavor right in the middle of his event. She was using his platform to build her own. His phone buzzed. It was a text from one of his board members, seated at a table closer to the front. "This is a PR disaster, Richard. Her video is the only thing anyone is talking about. You're being completely overshadowed. Fix this." Before Richard could even process how to fix the unfixable, the MC returned to the podium. "Thank you. Truly inspiring," the MC said. "And now it is time for the evening's keynote address. As per the updated program, please welcome to the stage a woman whose story of resilience and vision is a true inspiration, Ms. Kennedy Hastings." This was it, the ultimate power play. It was a direct theft of the spotlight. From table 42, Richard watched in horror as Kennedy, poised and serene, rose from her seat. Jeremy gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. She walked towards the stage, the silver blue light following her, making her look ethereal and powerful. The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. Richard couldn't take it. This was his breaking point. The careful facade of composure he had maintained all evening shattered into a million pieces. "No!" The word escaped his lips as a strangled shout. He shot to his feet, knocking his chair over with a clatter that echoed in the silent room. No, this is my event, my foundation. She has no right. All heads swiveled towards him. The whispers started immediately. Tiffany buried her face in her hands, mortified. Richard, now the center of attention, for all the wrong reasons, pointed a trembling finger at the stage. Security. Get her off that stage. Remove her from the premises. Two large security guards in black suits, who had been standing impassively by the main doors, started to move. But they didn't walk towards the stage. They walked towards Richard. One of the guards, a mountain of a man, with a calm, deep voice, spoke. Mr. Sterling, I'm going to have to ask you to sit down. You're causing a disturbance. Richard stared at him, bewildered. I am the host. I hired you. You work for me. Our apologies, sir, the second guard said, his tone polite but firm. Our contract for tonight is with the venue ownership. That's EV Holdings. Ms. Hastings is our client. Our instructions are to ensure she has a smooth, drama-free evening. The irony was so thick, so suffocating, it was almost comical. Kennedy's own words from the banishment email, weaponized and fired back at him in front of 200 of the most influential people in New York. He was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The public humiliation was absolute. He had lost control of his party, his security, his dignity, and his narrative. He was no longer the host, the visionary, the man in charge. He was just a noisy guest, being told to sit down and be quiet at a party that was no longer his. Defeated, he sank back into his chair, the sound of polite, scattered applause for Kennedy beginning to swell as she reached the podium. The unraveling was complete. Now came the final cut. Kennedy stood at the podium, the polished wood cool beneath her fingertips. The entire room was hers, a captive audience held in a state of suspended disbelief. She looked out over the sea of faces, the curious, the sympathetic, the schadenfreude-filled, and her eyes finally landed on Richard. He was slumped in his chair at table 42, a portrait of impotent fury, a king dethroned in his own crumbling court. She took a breath, calming the tremor of adrenaline inside her. This was not a moment for anger. It was a moment for grace, because grace, she knew, was the most devastating weapon of all. Good evening, she began, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. It filled every corner of the vast ballroom. Thank you all for being here tonight to support such an important cause. Philanthropy at its heart is about building something better. It's about creating a legacy that lasts. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Legacy. It's a powerful word. It's something many of us in this room think about. We build companies, we build families, we build foundations, all in the hope of leaving a positive mark on the world. Her eyes swept the room before returning to Richard. Many of you know the Sterling Foundation as the creation of one man, Richard Sterling. A polite, if slightly hesitant smattering of applause rippled through the room. Richard flinched, as if struck. But a foundation, like any great structure, is only as strong as its foundation, the ideas upon which it is built. And I should know, she continued, her voice softening, with a hint of nostalgia that was far more cutting than any accusation. Because I was there when the first stone was laid. A collective, quiet gasp. This was more than a power play over a venue. This was a public reclamation of history. Years ago, in a small apartment with big dreams, the concept for this foundation was born. It was born out of late-night conversations about purpose, about what we would do if we were ever fortunate enough to have more than we needed. I remember sketching the logo on a napkin from our favorite pizza place. I remember writing the mission statement, the one that speaks of empowerment and creating opportunities. She didn't need to say, I wrote it. The implication was clear and undeniable. She was calmly and methodically taking back every brick of the institution he had claimed as solely his own. But sometimes, she went on, her tone shifting from nostalgic to steely, stories get simplified, narratives get rewritten, contributions are forgotten. It's a story that is not unique to me. It is the story of so many women whose ideas, labor, and support become footnotes in the biographies of powerful men. She looked directly at the investors, at Table 1, Tanaka Senator, Matthews, and the others. A business, much like a charity, is built on trust, on transparency, on the integrity of its leadership. You need to know that the person at the helm is not just selling you a vision, but has built it on solid, truthful ground. This was the kill shot. It was no longer personal. It was business. Which is why, she announced, her voice ringing with newfound strength, I was so inspired to create the Hastings Initiative. The logo from the video appeared on the screens behind her. My partner Jeremy Shaw and I have seeded the initiative tonight with an initial endowment of $50 million. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. $50 million. It was a staggering sum, an amount that instantly made her a major philanthropic player. It dwarfed the fundraising goal of Richard's gala. The Hastings Initiative will be dedicated to one-mission funding and mentoring female entrepreneurs, innovators, and creators. We will ensure that no woman with a brilliant idea is ever written out of her own success story. We will provide the capital, the legal support, and the strategic guidance to make sure their names are on the patents, the business licenses, and the buildings. She smiled a genuine, brilliant smile of triumph. And to kick things off, I would like to make the first official grant from the Hastings Initiative, a donation of $500,000 to the Sterling Foundation. The room was stunned into silence. It was an act of such audacious, magnificent power. She was funding her ex-husband's charity live in front of all his potential backers. It was an act of charity that was also a final crushing assertion of dominance. She was no longer the victim. She was the benefactor. I still believe in the original mission we drafted all those years ago, she said. Her parting shot aimed directly at Richard's heart. And now I can finally ensure it's properly funded. And she finished her speech by inviting everyone to make pledges, not to the Sterling Foundation, but to the Hastings Initiative, promising that she and Jeremy would personally match every dollar donated tonight. Aides, clearly prearranged, began moving through the room with tablets, and hands shot up immediately. The tide of money, influence, and support in the room had turned completely and irrevocably towards Kennedy. As she walked off the stage to a thunderous standing ovation, she did not look at Richard. She didn't have to. She could feel his world collapsing. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for him. Kenji Tanaka, the Omnicorp CEO, was the first to act. He stood up discreetly, signaled to his aide, and without a word, walked out of the ballroom. He was followed by two other major investors Richard had been courting for months. The message was clear: the ship was sinking, and they were getting off. Tiffany Dupont, who had watched the entire speech with a horrified, dawning comprehension, saw her future dissolving before her eyes. The glamour, the money, the status, it was all tied to a man who had just been publicly neutered. She looked at Richard, at his pale, defeated face, and then at the radiant Kennedy, surrounded by admirers and donors. She quietly slipped her Cartier engagement ring off her finger, placed it on the table beside her half-eaten, unwanted vegan meal, stood up and walked out of the ballroom and out of Richard's life. Richard Sterling was left utterly alone at table 42. A pathetic island in a sea of his own making. He was surrounded by the ghost of his own party, the air thick with the sounds of his ruin, the enthusiastic chatter of donations being made to another's cause, the polite applause for the woman he had tried to destroy, and the final, deafening swoosh of the kitchen door closing on his legacy. The night he had designed to be his greatest triumph had become his public obituary. The days following the gala were not a whirlwind. they were a digital flood. Kennedy's phone became a vibrating talisman of her new reality, buzzing incessantly with notifications from news alerts, social media tags, and an influx of emails that was almost impossible to manage. The story had gone viral, transcending the society pages and landing squarely in the mainstream. It was a modern fable of David and Goliath, except Goliath had tried to ban David from the arena, so David's billionaire friend had bought the arena, handed David a better slingshot, and broadcast the whole thing live. She would be scrolling through her tablet in the morning, and her own face would stare back at her from the front page of a news site. Forbes ran the headline that seemed to capture the delicious audacity of it all. The hostess takes the house. How Kennedy Hastings turned a gala ban into a philanthropic empire. And the piece praised her strategic brilliance, framing the entire night not as revenge, but as a masterfully executed launch for the Hastings Initiative. More damningly, the Wall Street Journal published a scathing forensic analysis of Sterling Innovations' now fatally exposed financial fragility. It detailed how the public catastrophic failure of investor confidence at the gala had triggered a series of margin calls on Richard's personal and corporate loans. The investor exodus wasn't just symbolic, it was the first domino in a chain reaction that was swiftly leveling his entire enterprise. The final, pathetic nail in his social coffin came from Tiffany DuPont, who gave an exclusive, tear-drenched interview to a celebrity tabloid painting herself as a victim, deceived by a man of false promises. She spoke of his secret financial troubles and controlling nature, a narrative so laughably hypocritical that it only served to highlight Richard's complete and utter fall from grace. Within 2 weeks, the inevitable became official. Sterling Innovations, stripped of its credit lines and abandoned by its board, filed for Chapter 11, bankruptcy. Richard Sterling, once a fixture on the city's social and business scene, became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties about the dangers of underestimating a woman with nothing to lose and everything to reclaim. But inside the serene quiet of their penthouse, high above the frenetic energy of the city, the noise of the world fell away. The constant buzz was silenced, leaving only the gentle clink of a porcelain mug against a marble countertop. Kennedy stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a mug of Earl Grey tea warming her hands, watching the morning light spill over Central Park. For so long, her name had been a satellite to her identity, defined by her relationship to him, Richard's wife, Richard's ex-wife. The woman he had supported, the woman he had left, the woman he had banned. Now the gravitational pull was gone, and she was free, floating in a new orbit of her own making. Jeremy came up behind her, his presence a familiar comfort. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder as they looked out at the view together. "Good morning, Miss Hastings," he murmured into her hair, his voice laced with a proud smile. Or should I say, New York's newest philanthropic powerhouse. Kennedy leaned back against his chest, a soft, genuine smile gracing her lips. "It feels surreal," she admitted. "For a decade, I felt like I was living in a story someone else was writing for me. Now it feels like I've finally picked up the pen myself." She turned in his arms to face him, her eyes clear and bright. "I'm not his anything anymore. I'm not the woman he left. I'm not the woman he banned." She took a breath, and the words came out with a simple, profound finality. "I'm just Kennedy Hastings, and that's who you've always been," Jeremy said, his gaze full of warmth. "The world just finally caught up." He watched her for a moment, observing the subtle shift in her posture, the newfound confidence in her gaze. "I've never been more proud of you, Kennedy, not because of the money or the power play, but because you faced the ghost that haunted you and didn't just banish it. You reminded it that you were the one with the real power all along." A playful glint entered her eyes. "Well, it doesn't hurt to have a little leverage." She laughed, a sound that was light and completely unburdened. "It turns out, revenge is a dish best served on property you own." Later that afternoon, She was at her desk, sifting through the deluge of emails. She paused on one and motioned for Jeremy to come over. "Listen to this," she said, her voice soft with emotion. She read from the screen. "Dear Ms. Hastings, my name is Maria. I am a biochemist with a patent for a new water purification system. For 2 years, I have been told by venture capital firms that my idea is promising, but that I need a more experienced male partner to lead the company. After reading your story, I feel for the first time that someone understands. Thank you for making me feel seen." Kennedy looked up at Jeremy, her eyes shining. "This, she said, tapping the screen. "This is what it was all for. The humiliation of Richard, the collapse of his company, that was just the closing of an old door. This, the hope and inspiration sparking in women like Maria, was the opening of 1,000 new ones. The Hastings Initiative wasn't an act of revenge. It was the work she was always meant to do, an engine of change fueled by the very fires that were meant to consume her. In the end, the Sterling Foundation dissolved, without fanfare, its remaining assets quietly absorbed by a community trust. It was a footnote, a forgotten chapter, but the grand Astoria still under the silent, gleaming ownership of Eve Holdings remained. It stood as a magnificent gilded monument on the New York skyline, a monument to the night a woman who was told she wasn't welcome decided to buy the door, the walls, and the whole damn room. And in doing so, built her own kingdom from the ashes of a love long dead. She was no longer in anyone's shadow. She was the sun. And so Kennedy Hastings didn't just get even, she got ahead. She transformed a moment of profound personal insult into an empire of purpose. Her story teaches us that the ultimate power isn't in tearing someone else down, but in building yourself up so high that their shadows can no longer touch you. Richard Sterling wanted to erase her from a single night, but instead he made her the headline of the year and catalyzed the birth of her true legacy. She proved that the best revenge isn't loud or angry, but brilliant, strategic, and ultimately good. What did you think of Kennedy's incredible power move? Was it pure genius or a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of drama resilience and sweet, sweet victory, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that are stranger than fiction. Click that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching.